Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Word on the Snakevine. I'm your host Ross Deacon, and in this podcast we talk all about things venomous animal related, from venom research, venomous animal husbandry, animal conservation, herping, and of course snakebite and snakebite initiatives from all around this world. On this episode, I've joining me as my co-host.
Hi, I'm Denny.
Hi, I'm Ed. And before we start, I have to do a few formalities. Any views expressed in this episode are the views of the guests and the host, not the facilities or company they work for.
And today we have the Asclepius Snakebite Foundation joining us for a Snakebite Awareness Day special. So today we have Jordan and Nick joining us. How are you two today?
Excellent.
We're quite good, yep.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's great to have people like yourselves come and support the podcast, and for us to be able to give yourselves some support and a voice in the market. So, I think we'll crack straight on. And how did you both start Asclepius Snakebite Foundation, and how did it come about?
Yeah, I guess I can take this one. So we started it essentially. It was something we were discussing for many years, sort of independently and in small teams, and we realized that there were a lot of us who were working in Africa and sort of around the developing world on snakebite issues, but there's not a lot of funding and there's not a lot of support in this area. And we decided that we probably could get more done and do a greater good if we banded together and sort of combined our efforts. So that's sort of where it came from, is sort of like an all-star team of various folks who are working on this, who just do it because we care about it and wanted to make a bigger impact. So
how did you form the team? Because I know there's some rather who we would say definitely in the venomous snake world, quite a few big names that have joined the team with you.
Yeah, I think, as you guys know, it's a small world for sure. A lot of us had worked together, and then so like I worked with Jean-Philippe and Kate and a bunch of other folks, and then I think sort of Venom Week 2018 was a big catalyst where a lot of us came together and just sort of hit it off personally and realized that we were all working on similar things and had a similar goal, and that for me was sort of the catalyst to say, all right, let's make this bigger than we were planning, because we were already sort of planning a smaller scale foundation. But at that point, that really gave us an opportunity to take it to the next level, I would say.
Okay, so sorry, I'd just like to apologise for the background noise. I think we should be getting better. I think somebody's cleaning their snake room while we're recording this.
I'm actually sitting on the ground and doing nothing.
Oh, so this may be somebody else who's making the background noise this time. So once you formed it, how did you come about your aims and visions and your mission statement to kind of what countries you were going to work in? How did you decide those aspects?
So we try to go where the greatest need is, and we've also gone sort of based on our previous connections and ties that we've made. So for instance, Kate has worked in the Congo for more than 20 years. Jean-Philippe has worked in West Africa for a very long time. I'd worked in Kenya for a while. So we essentially sort of looked at where the need was greatest and where the least resources were being directed, and tried to focus in on those places.
So something that I forgot to mention, I forgot to ask going back a little bit actually, was kind of how did you come about with the name for the foundation? How was all that decided, and is there actually a meaning behind the name, or?
So the Asclepius Snakebite Foundation, Asclepius is the sort of rod of medicine. So if you look at an ambulance, you'll see a rod with a snake on it. So it's the symbol of medicine, and we chose it for a couple of reasons. I think the biggest one is we like the symbolism of snakes sort of as both a healing force and also, this issue that we're trying to combat. And I think there's sort of a circular nature to this thing. There's a vicious circle of snakebite, but also if you look at snakebite, the solution comes from the snake itself. It's antivenom, which comes from snakes and venom. So I think the snake as a symbol of medicine has a standard meaning, and then I think in this case it has a sort of a deeper meaning as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I think that does actually make quite a lot of sense when you think about it in that kind of way. So now we know about a little bit more about the Asclepius Snakebite Foundation. So now I think it'd be quite good to learn a little bit more about you and Nick, and understand how did you get involved in snakebite and obviously in medicine in general.
Yeah. Do you want me to go first, or do you want Nick to take this?
No, go ahead, Jordan, and then I can chime in after.
Okay, sounds good. So for me, I started off as a herpetologist, and I thought I wanted to be a PhD herpetologist doing snake research in Africa. And my general strategy has always just been to find whoever was the best person at what I was doing and try and convince them to train me, or the best person at what I wanted to do. So I went over to Biochem, which was at the time run by Sanda Ash and Royan, and they agreed to train me up. And so I sort of apprenticed under them and did some work out in Kenya. And people kept coming up to me and when I was out in the field and asking me like random medical questions. I think they thought if I was dumb enough to play with dangerous snakes in the field, I probably knew how to fix various issues that might arise. And I didn't at the time. So I got back and I took a wilderness EMT course and realized that medicine was equally fascinating to me as snakes. And so I decided at that point I wanted to be a physician, ultimately doing snakebite. But I also realized that you can't specialize in snakebite in medical school. And I'm sure Nick can talk more about this since he's already sort of reached the end of the path that I'm midway along. But for me, I decided, I guess, since I knew where I wanted to go and I couldn't get there through medical school directly, I decided I would specialize in advance, and spent the sort of past 10 years working with various snakebite people, training and doing research and sort of building up a network and a skill set in that area. So I became a paramedic and a wilderness paramedic, and then sort of focused a lot on snakebite management in austere sub-Saharan Africa. So now that I've done all that, I'm getting ready to study for the MCAT and move on to medical school in the next few years.
So so you actually had quite an interesting apprenticeship, effectively, with Biochem. I think not many people can lay claim to learning with the great people that they have there. That's
Yeah, it was a great experience. I went out and I think I was 18 at the time, and I told Sanda, I was either 16 or 18, and I was like, hey, can you teach me how to catch venomous snakes? This is what I want to do. And she was like, well, I can't promise you anything except that I'll let you clean the cages, but we'll see how you do, and see whether we're comfortable training you up, and eventually they did. So
I think it's quite important that you said that it's actually the herbs that were the original passion that's kind of led on to the snakebite, kind of the snakebite medicine side of it, rather than it being a medicine side that's been moved across into snakes and snakebite. I think that's quite a good path, and it seems to be quite a common path a lot of people have. Then I think it's carry on.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was going to say, yeah, absolutely. I think I sort of stumbled into medicine and then realized I loved it. But it's interesting, Nick took he had a similar goal all along, but he sort of took a different pathway there. So I think we offer two different routes to the end goal.
Yeah, and I think that moves us quite nicely on to Nick, to telling us his story a little bit, and kind of how did you get into snakebite and into medicine?
So well, the into medicine part is a very, very complicated story, but specifically for snake bites, I grew up sort of out in the country, rural areas of California. I've always been catching snakes, and I knew I was moving on to medical school after college. I had a couple years where I worked for camps for kids with serious illnesses. I was a horse trainer and a high ropes coordinator out there, and we had a lot of rattlesnakes out in the Southern Californian desert, and so I got into catching venomous snakes by working with the local group who would go out and sort of relocate them, if you will. Not nearly as proliferative as Jordan's training experience, but I got more comfortable in that realm. And then when I went on to medical school, I thought I wanted to do just mainly wilderness medicine, sort of live in the base camp of Mount Everest and do research and all that stuff. But as I moved along, I realized I could do more and more in the snakebite realm. It's always fascinated me, and so I went to school at UCSF in San Francisco, and then did an emergency medicine residency at a place with a good wilderness medicine program. And then everybody's like, well, if you're really gonna do snakebite medicine, you should do a medical toxicology fellowship. And so I went on and did a medical toxicology fellowship out at Rocky Mountain Poison Center in Denver, and was able to really make really good connections, and then learn from the best, right? So Rick Dart runs the Poison Center there. Eric Lavonis is there. was able to get into the lab with Steve Mackesy and do some phenomics work with him, and really just make some good connections, and got to where I am now.
So yeah, as you say, you had quite a different bringing into it than from Jordan, which obviously will allow you to have different ideas when it comes to the field and exactly how the foundation goes forward from there. So let's move this on. So kind of once you started to work in these countries, can you tell us kind of a little bit more about the countries that you're working in, kind of about the facts and figures about them, and then kind of the work that you're doing to help combat the snake human conflict?
Yeah.
Jordan, you there?
Yeah. Do you want to take this one, or you want me to?
Go ahead and start, and then I'll fill in.
Okay. So yeah, we would ultimately love to work around the world. Nick's done a lot of work in Asia before. Ben Abo, another one of our docs and co-founders, has done a lot of work in Latin America. I think our core right now is focused on sub-Saharan Africa, and that's because, well, for a few reasons. So one is the scope of the snakebite crisis is really huge there. I think you could make a safe argument that it's probably the most neglected area of snakebite. We currently think there are 50,000 deaths a year in India and 30,000 deaths a year, rough estimate, in Africa, but we're missing data, missing accurate data on a lot of Africa, places like Sudan and the Congo and, Chad and Central African Republic and all of these countries that probably have a staggering number of bites. And we just don't know how many bites there are and how many deaths and disabilities there are. So, for me, I've spent the last 10 years focused on snakebite in Africa, so it's definitely where I have the deepest connections. I sort of apprenticed under Jean-Philippe after Biochem, and so worked in a lot of rural areas doing snakebite stuff with him. And so it was a natural place for us to go, but I think it's sort of a combination partially of that and partially there's a very big need. And then also just the diversity of African venomous snakes is very large, and they're clinically very interesting as well.
Yeah, I think a unique part of our group is we're a collection of not just clinicians, but also like real true herpetologists, right? So, Jordan, Kate Jackson, a few other people. So we do not just sort of the clinical side, but we want to look sort of at what the regional variations are of some of the venoms in that aspect. So we get samples from those areas and do phenomic work, with the idea that hopefully, one, we can help to broaden the literature on what the geographic ranges are, because a lot of, not just with snake bites, but a lot of the snakes we actually just don't know what their actual true ranges are. And then two, we can sort of help, where the idea is to maybe apply that to how it is affecting our clinical practice.
Yeah, because as we know from other podcasts and from other information that's around, that locality differences in venom is quite widely spread, but understanding snake to snake how they differ is still very relatively unknown and uncharted water, really. I know we have some quite good data on the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine have done, and other people have done on stuff like puff adders and such forth, but other species we're still missing quite a lot of data.
Well, yeah, and
So,
even with some of the, the big mystery for some of the snakes is like, a lot of the colubrids that we just don't know about. But then also just like, black mambas in South Africa aren't the same as black mambas in West Africa. Likely, there's probably some phenomic component that's variable. And it'd be interesting to sort of look at that and sort of understand how that affects people clinically and then how it affects the treatments.
yeah. And I would add too, one of the fascinating things about working in Africa and snakebite is there's so much that is undocumented and unpublished. For instance, so we're setting up a clinic in Guinea, or we've just set up a partnership with a clinic there to have a sort of ASF snakebite clinic, and they have seen a lot of very bizarre, previously unreported manifestations of lapid bites in particular. So, for instance, they see a full neurotoxic syndrome from spitting cobra bites there, from Naja nigricollis, which is not reported elsewhere. And they also have been reporting abnormal local bleeding after bites from black mambas and forest cobras, which is also unreported elsewhere. So, I think in my experience, if you're doing snakebite in Africa, if you look hard enough at a case, you can probably learn something new, just because there's so little that's sort of reported adequately.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, that's kind of the case with a lot of Africa. I think in other places like India, Thailand, and a lot of the Southeast Asian countries and Asian countries, they are better at reporting the numbers than some of the African countries. So as you say, a lot of it seems to be quite uncharted in Africa compared to other countries.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of issues with reporting, and like for instance, in Kenya for years, the snake bites were recorded as animal bites. So rabies, dog bites and snake bites and everything. It was all just lumped under one thing. So sometimes you get out to a county that's been interested in it, and they might have really good snake bite data, but that doesn't always make it back to the sort of central health system and the reporting network. And so I think there's probably good data buried out there in a lot of places, but we're not accessing it.
Well, I mean, we could just going out to our clinic in Guinea, they see, anywhere from 600 to 700 bites a year. They have them all documented. They have these big handwritten ledgers. That data gets reported nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we know that they're getting a ton of bites, and they have all the signs and symptoms, all the vitals, pretty much everything, but they don't put it out there into the world, and so it doesn't really get counted in any of the numbers.
That information is useful for new snakebite treatments and just understanding exactly what's happening per snakebite in general, for as you say, from a clinical aspect and from and from just a data aspect as regards to other things that's happening from. So
one of the other things to talk about when you're saying about a lack of data is that was one of the reasons it took so long for the WHO to adopt snakebite as a neglected tropical disease.
Yeah.
The lack of data made it a counter argument for accepting it, and that's what like the Snakebite Foundation's initiatives have pushed so hard to get more data, was to almost take it to the WHO and say, look, this is the reality, and this is still underestimated because we don't have all the data, we need more, and with your assistance we can get more.
It actually baffles me, really. I don't understand how it could go so long without proper data and stuff. It should be something really important. It's the day-to-day thing that over there.
It is, but it's not always accessible or reportable. And as you say, they might have all the data there, but if it doesn't go out of country, it's almost useless, the international effort.
Yeah.
Is that Ed?
Well, and
Ed talking?
Jordan, the counter too, though, is, for example, in the United States, we have a very robust medical system where a lot of diseases are reported, and even still, we publish ranges of how many snake bites we think occur in the U.S. Right? So we always say anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000.
Snake bite.
Yeah, not everybody reports a snake bite, and then
not everyone reports it.
Well, most people report it, but the problem is that we don't have a unified healthcare reporting system. It's not a reportable disease, right? And so we extract data from poison centers, we extract data from billing codes nationally. We have a registry that some medical toxicologists input our data into, and we sort of extrapolate from all that. But still, like we don't know the exact number, right? And so when you go to these places where healthcare infrastructure is essentially non-existent or very limited, you know, a lot of their stuff is just on paper charts. They either misdiagnose it, they don't chart it appropriately, or they chart it really, really, really well, and they just don't put the numbers out there. So it's a really difficult to quantify thing that I think, you know, like ASF and other groups that are working on this, hopefully we can help better the epidemiologic statistics of how this is actually affecting people.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the help can come from, is, as you say, is charting what the data and actually see what's actually happening properly. Because as you say, the numbers are probably not as true as we keep saying that they are. We're probably either severely underestimating what this problem actually is from a worldwide perspective. Because like talking to a doctor in Indonesia, she's adamant that they have a similar problem where it's actually their health minister and their national health department aren't actually interested in snakebite at all, even though that they are getting up to 30. She was adamant that it's up to 30,000 deaths a year just in Indonesia.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't doubt that number. It's just hard to quantify.
Her health minister was just not interested at all. They're just not genuinely not interested. They see it as not their. Some of these countries see it as not their issue.
Yeah,
which is...
It's funny too because you know, I was over in Kenya in March and out in Baringo County, which is an interesting place for snakebite, and you know, out there we found that really, if I was a politician, I would focus on snakebite as an issue that would make people happy, because everyone is so afraid of snakes and so concerned and, you know, personally impacted by snakebite that if you were to do a good public relations campaign and, you know, put anti-venom out there and make it known that you care about this and are addressing it, like, it's actually great press for governments. So it always surprises me that they don't deal with this. Because, you know, we were out there doing training and had folks at rural clinics be like, this is the best thing the government's ever, you know, done in my, you know, 50 years living here. And so I think, you know, there's such a positive response. Sometimes it baffles me that it flies under the radar. And I do think there's places like Baringo County where, you know, our friend Winnie Bore, who runs the health department out there, is doing amazing work. And also I was asking about Edd because, you know, Edd's team is doing fantastic work there with CaseRick and sort of the snakebite research intervention centers they're doing and supporting. And so, you know, I think there's a great network of people that are looking at this. But again, in Baringo County, you know, there was one clinic I went to where someone I think the Red Cross had come and done an estimate for Baringo, and they had said, you know, oh, we think there's, you know, 500 bites a year. Turns out this clinic is getting 500 bites a month, you know, a single clinic. And so that data just wasn't getting reported. So in reality, you know, the figure is massively higher, even just in that one county.
I just want to go back on, just loop back to that number, 500 bites. 500 bites a month.
At a single clinic.
At a single clinic.
Staggering.
So that is just. Well, I was going to do a bit of quick mental arithmetic, but my brain won't let me right now. So
it's too much.
It's
6,000.
Yeah.
6,000
a year.
6,000 a year, but that's 16 bites a day are coming in on average into that clinic alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
was a staggering number.
It takes up a lot of the clinical capability as well. In Nigeria, for example, there's certain times, certain seasons, they might have 90% of their clinic are snakebite victims. And then you have the problem of you're diverting all the resources to treat snakebite, and then other diseases are getting kind of left by the wayside because they cannot manage both in the same clinic. They haven't got the space, the resources, and that becomes an even bigger problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's hard for Westerners definitely Westerners, and to understand kind of these figures really, because we don't see this firsthand. It's just absolutely staggering. And as you say,
Well,
with how it affects other parts of the clinic, if 90% of your resources is just treating snakebite, what else is going missed because of that? And kind of how do people get treatment for other things that they need treatment for?
yeah, absolutely. I spent the better part of a year posted out to a really rural clinic in northern Benin as the sole snakebite guy for the area under Jean-Philippe Chapeau. And definitely it was a wake up call, sort of an eye opener, because these places are always operating under a constant state of triage, just due to the sheer resource limitations and the volume of sick patients with malaria and meningitis and pneumonia and tuberculosis and trauma and all sorts of things that come in. But then you get a sick snakebite patient, and a lot of these folks they're not low acuity patients. They really require a lot of attention until they're stabilized. And so I think there's places like Guinea with a high incidence of neurotoxic bites where, if you need to ventilate someone, that's at least one person who's tied to that bed, unless you have a ventilator, which most of these places don't, tied to that bed until the person regains muscle strength and function. And that's just not practical in a lot of places. So yeah, it's a real challenge.
You then have the period afterwards as well where they have to stay in. So say 24 hours after they've stabilized. That's a bed
Absolutely.
that's taken up for that amount of time, then can't go to someone else. And it's this never-ending cycle, as you say, a constant state of triage.
Yep.
So that is just. It's every time I hear the numbers, it just amazes me. Even though I hear them regularly, and it's all just pretty mad.
One thing too, like going back to the West, like most Westerners not understanding is, it's not just the number of bites, but it's the severity of the bites coming in, right? Like, at least in the U.S., the majority of our bites are pit vipers, copperheads. Occasionally you get the severe rattlesnake bite, maybe a severe cottonmouth bite, but deaths are rare here. We got maybe 5 a year. There's certainly a lot of pain and swelling going on. We don't really get many coral snake bites, maybe 100 or so a year, and that's isolated to sort of the southeast region in Florida, Mississippi, and then in Texas. But these people, when you go out there, when you go to Guinea, Kenya, other places, you talk to everybody that has a family member or a friend who's probably died from a snake bite, or at least has some sort of morbidity issue. They have long-term, they can't work, they have dysfunction of their arm or their leg or something like that, and it's pretty staggering because it's just a way of life for them out there. And so people are we're trying to get better numbers, but at the same time, the severity is also a big problem there.
Severity is not spoken about because we still can't get the numbers out there.
Yep.
Personally, that's how I see it. We're still trying to wrestle with the numbers. We can't even deal with the situation. So you can say the US, like you say, you can manage a lot of pain quite easily. Managing a neurotoxic bite is a lot harder and a lot more resources needed to manage that drain.
Well, and even from the viper standpoint, like getting antivenom on board in the U.S. to sort of minimize the risk of long-term sequelae is much easier to accomplish. Whereas, if you get a bad rhinoceros viper bite or some of the other vipers out there that just cause intense amount of swelling and pain and disfigurement, I mean, that patient may be permanently injured just from that. Along with the short-term sort of neurotoxic support that needs to happen, and so if you can't work because of your disfigurement, then that's just the way it is. You don't work, and you may be sort of a burden on your family, it may be a long-term issue, and so this is a problem everywhere. India, Sri Lanka, Latin America, Africa, a lot of places that don't have the money or the social structure to support somebody with something like that.
Yeah, and it's causing a lot of families to be to be put into debt and to be put into positions where they shouldn't have to be, really. They're trying to, as you say, look after a family member that's got a severe disability now because they've lost an arm, a leg, or muscles, or got nerve damage from varying snake bites. And these people, they can't work, they can't earn money, they can't pay for the treatment that they've received in a lot of conditions.
Or even
become a social pariah or something.
Yeah, and or they do recover well, but the snake bite treatment costs 3 years of their salary, right? So they end up having to sell a piece of their land that they work, and so they don't make money off that land anymore. They have to sell an important piece of cattle or some other animal or something that's just very important to them in order to sort of pay back their debt. And so it becomes a hindrance on them and often can put them sort of out of work, or the inability to sort of produce to a level that they were before.
And this is having a massive impact on not only people, but the economies and stuff of these countries too, which is able to support these people and produce it, and to be able to work towards getting clinics and this information to these people as well. So it's actually having quite the crisis is having more of just an impact than just on people, but we just don't understand the actual we don't understand actually how those impacts actually are affecting countries, and also, as you say, economies and such forth as well.
The other thing to put in there is when you say about them going into debt makes them more likely to come into contact with more snakes. If you can't repair your house, and it's more likely for snakes to come in, then you're at more risk of being bitten. So if you are plunged further into debt because of snake bite, it could mean you're at further risk for another bite.
Yeah.
It's definitely a bit of a vicious
Interesting
cycle.
point.
It's definitely a bit of a vicious cycle there. So, so you were talking about the clinic that you've set up in Guinea. So how did you come about setting up the clinic, and how and why was that kind of clinic chosen, and kind of how do you kind of what support does that clinic give to the local community, and yeah. I was going to ask something else, but it's kind of just dropped out of my head.
Yeah. Well, I think so. The clinic itself, it's at there's a research institute about 20 minutes outside of Kindia, Guinea, that focuses on a variety of things. Majorly, the name is the Research Institute of Applied Biology of Guinea. It previously was the Pasteur Institute of Guinea. And they do a lot of parasitology and virology and herpetology and a few other things. But essentially, there's a herpetologist out there named Salou Balde, who the way he tells it is 1998. He had just gotten back from doing a couple of years in Russia studying, and he was doing herpetology work in Guinea and outside of Kindia, and a dad essentially brought his 4-year-old daughter to the research institute because she had been bitten by a neurotoxic snake, and he thought that they'd be able to give treatment to her at this research institute, and essentially the girl ends up dying in Salou's arms, and so Salou's a man of a lot of integrity and wants to improve his community. He's done stuff like he's built sort of a freshwater tank that anybody in the community can come to his house and get water from. He's built 2 mosques so that people in his area can have a place to go and pray. So he does a lot. He essentially just said, we need to start a treatment facility. And so he sort of commandeered this old 2-bedroom house on the research premises, and then just started this clinic where they see a bunch of snake bites. As far as I know, and Jordan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the only clinic in Guinea that is a snake bite dedicated center.
No, you're correct.
And so, Salou, with almost no medical training, started training other people to work at the clinic, and so they have this sort of small, stable group of people who treat snake bites there. They now have a nurse and they have a physician who live in that area and sort of help to manage it. But they've been running this thing essentially with no supplies. I mean, when me and Jordan and Ben went out there in July and August, we introduced the first like airway management tools that before they were just essentially fanning their neurotoxic snake bites as an airway support. And so they've done a lot.
Sorry, I'm just going. They were fanning the patient.
Yeah,
as neurotoxic.
Imagine
support.
imagine just a neurotoxic snake bite lying on a mat and with just a big sort of I don't know, just sort of a big fan, just your family member fanning in order to sort of get better air to the patient. So we were the first ones to sort of introduce bag valve masks to them. Sort of very basic stuff for us in Western culture as far as medicine goes. It sort of is the A part of our ABCs of, emergency medicine or EMS care. But before that, they were just sort of doing what they could because they had no supplies. They were able to get anti-venom. They were able to have sort of basic medications, but they didn't have anything advanced.
I think that's what people forget as well. Also, that as you just said, a family member would be fanning a neurotoxic bite to help try and stabilize their airways. That is
And through their, through just sort of perseverance and trying to learn new techniques, they've dropped the mortality rate there from about 35% to less than 5% by giving good, appropriate anti-venom, being able to do good testing, and just sort of basic support. Now, I think with better airway support, we can certainly decrease their neurotoxic snakebite mortality. But getting back to how we got involved there, I think 2005, Salou met Jean-Philippe at a conference in Benin and sort of expressed his desire to work together to sort of get better resources and better training out there. And with the fruition of ASF and Jean-Philippe's involvement, we sort of have connected. And we went out there for the first time in July, and we're able to bring. I think we brought up several hundred vials of anti-venom and 6 bags, Jordan, of medical supplies that got donated to us.
Yeah, we had like 600 or 800 pounds of medications and equipment and supplies and then we've just sort of fortified our partnership of going back sort of twice a year or so, and then providing remote support to them as they need. But it's really all Salou's sort of initial work, and then just asking us to get involved.
It's pretty incredible that one person did that by themselves, no medical training, just wanted to give people that were near him a facility that they could go to if they were bitten to get medical help. That's pretty amazing in itself.
Yeah, certainly. And Guinea is a unique area, given that it's sort of on the borderline of this rainforest and then sort of savanna in the northern area. So they get this sort of overlapping mix of some really nasty snakes, right? They get green mamba, western mamba, and black mambas, and puff adder bites, and spitting cobra. So they get occasionally the Echis bite, but they get a lot of nasty stuff. I'm really, really surprised and sort of in awe on how well Salou has done with that clinic with almost no support.
Yeah. I mean, we had, I think, four or five rhinoceros viper bites over the course of a month, which is certainly an unusual one to get in most places in Africa. One of the things that sets them apart too is, a lot of West Africa in particular is dominated by the carpet vipers, and as Nick was saying, it's not a large percentage of their cases there. It's probably 5%, but those are mostly up in the drier areas. And they actually have probably the highest incidence, certainly the highest incidence that Jean-Philippe or any of our colleagues know of for West Africa or East or Central as far as neurotoxic bites. They get up to 30% severe neurotoxic bites from large elapids like forest cobras, black mambas, green mambas. So just, imagine 30% of, 600 or 700 patients a year are coming in with airway issues and you don't have bag valve masks. It's a real challenge.
As you say, it's just simple things for Western medicine, isn't it? Like that's very much a simple device that doesn't cost a lot of money and could be massively helpful to them. That's just.
I mean, even like we brought out, so we went out there as a fact-finding mission almost, and we were looking at like which sort of advanced things can we bring that are portable. And really, when we went out there, I just realized the next time we go out there, we need to bring more IVs, more gloves, more syringes, more just very basic stuff that when I'm on shift, when I do an emergency department shift, I probably throw a syringe away every 5 minutes in the department just because that's how we function, right? It gets used, it gets tossed. Whereas they have to figure out ways to sort of minimize the amount of supplies that they use per patient while also being effective because they just don't have more.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that we do differently too is, because a lot of our team comes from a wilderness and emergency medicine background, we try to go to places and find solutions that work within the confines of what they're doing. And so, we focused a lot of airway management stuff on pretty basic things that are effective, like, putting a pillow underneath the shoulders, which helps to align the airway anatomy in a way that keeps it open. And, tipping someone on their side and suctioning, when they vomit and basic airway positioning, things like that actually can go quite a ways in terms of keeping these patients alive. And your goal is really to keep them alive long enough for the antivenom to work, because ultimately that's what's going to fix things or not. But sometimes you got to get them over the line where it will start to take effect.
Yeah, that's this. As you say, there's basic things that these people can do, and even with initial first aid, bite first aid treatments. So it's something. Are you seeing with the clinic that you are getting patients quite early after having a bite, or do you still suffer? No.
Yeah, some of the bites were close by and they came in fairly early, but we had several patients who traveled over 7 hours on the back of a motorbike.
18 even, I think, for our the bad one you got.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think he had come from 200 kilometers away.
Yeah. So these, that goes to part of the, those were a lot of the ones that were far away. Those are all viper bites, because if you got tagged by a mamba in that area, you're not going to survive a 7-hour motorbike trip.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And so we just don't know what the actual incidence despite having a very high incidence of neurotoxic bites in that area, like we don't actually know the true incidence of the surrounding area, because all of our bites longer than 2 or 3 hours out were all really bad edematous viper bites in the lower extremities. And so they travel quite the distance because they know this clinic exists and they know that they're going to get appropriate care. And two, I think something like 80% of the people in West Africa who get bitten end up seeing a healer before coming to a snakebite clinic. So just, despite not even just direct access to the clinic, they stop at a local healer and then try to get local treatments first. And once they realize that may or may not be working, they then come see us.
That's pretty mad, I think. As you were saying, you when you were there, you had some bad bites. Would you be able to share that story with us? Please do feel free to say no, because we do understand that some of it is quite obviously upsetting for people involved in the bite, involved in treating the bites as well as the bites themselves.
Well, I think overall the general theme is, we had one hand bite, that was an extenuating circumstance, but otherwise everybody else who comes in is usually bit on the foot. It's usually bit while they're walking either in the dark or they're walking in the morning down to the river. We also had a couple of farmers who got bit, and so the vast majority are lower extremity envenomations that come in, and they're always of working age. We had a couple 12-year-olds who got bit while they're going down and wash up at the river. But as far as specific stories, we're not able to share those. But the themes are there.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much for sharing that information. Anyway, I just wanted to ask, just in case you could, because I think sometimes actually hearing about obviously the in-depth detail and stuff can sometimes help it hit home for some people actually that these people are, as you say again, doing their everyday job or their everyday things that they would normally do. There's nothing, they're not going out of their way to get bitten and stuff, and the consequences of them just doing what effectively we do every day by going to work or while we're at work can actually be a life and death situation, where for a lot of us that isn't the case. So
I think I think the majority of the people out there as we talked about earlier, they have a very healthy fear of snakes, and so they don't mess around with them. They stay as far away as possible. Even when me and Jordan would go out herping, people, one, they thought we were crazy, and two, if we caught even just like a basic house snake, or even a chameleon, they would stay away.
Especially a chameleon.
They had just a lot of this weird fear that it was venomous.
They have a fear of venomous chameleons.
Well, they have
chameleons
a yeah. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, you can universally something Sanda told me years ago was, she was like, if you ever want to get a great seat in a restaurant in Nairobi, just put a chameleon on a branch outside and the whole thing will clear out in a minute. It seems to be an Africa-wide phobia of chameleons. So there's all sorts of different
similar
beliefs.
About geckos.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. There is one case that we can share, that we got permission to share, and I think it's a good one. It sort of highlights, I think, the importance of basic supportive care and good training. And our model is to focus on treatment, training, and research, and try to fill in gaps. And again, we came here knowing there was a problem with neurotoxic bites and looked a lot at airway management and things like that. And a few days after we left, they had a 10-year-old boy who was rushed to the clinic. I think it was an hour or two after a forest cobra bite. He was already in very serious condition. He had what's called a broken neck sign, which is when you lift someone off the bed and their neck just drops because the muscles are paralyzed. He's unable to speak, unable to swallow. And when you can't do that, you can't protect your airway. His respiratory muscles were getting weak. And they, managed this case just absolutely flawlessly. They, quickly bolused a large dose of antivenom on board, or actually not even a huge dose, but what they could give of antivenom on board. It was a couple vials. Gave it as a quick IV bolus, placed a pillow under his shoulders, opened his airway, suctioned him, decontaminated the upper airway so he wouldn't choke on his own secretions, monitored him with some of the basic equipment we put out there, like, oximeters and things like that. And really, I was really proud to see that, everything we had gone over in this airway training and sort of critical care training over the last month, they had taken to heart, but they also did what I think is often hardest for people that are less experienced with these interventions, which is they knew to not necessarily move to a more advanced airway unless it was necessary. There's always risks associated with those things, and in this case, we went over how to sort of titrate your decisions based on your patient, and they got the antivenom on board. They did some basic positioning, kept him alive, and he made a full recovery and left the clinic a couple days later. So, it's a perfect example, I think, of how, serious these cases are, and sort of also how oftentimes just a bare minimum of equipment and a little bit of training and just a focus on those, ABCs, airway, antivenom, breathing, circulation, really gets you most of the way there.
Definitely. I think that story is really, really quite encouraging. That, as you say, they've taken everything you've shown them while you were there. They've taken on board these simple things that's helped save somebody's life who looks like they were on the brink, which is pretty incredible. Definitely testament to the work that you guys are doing.
Well, and to the work, I think, to their work too. I mean, that they taught us a lot, for sure. I think there's probably no one else in West Africa with the experience in lapid envenomation that they have, and so even though there's not as much formal medical training among a lot of their team, I'd say they probably can go toe to toe with almost anyone on knowledge of the snakes and of various presentations, and certainly a very, very knowledgeable, very dedicated, passionate team. They just needed some basic equipment.
I think a testament does go to them as well. Well, with that, as you say, with no formal training, that means that formal training can make some quite a big difference in some cases, as you say. So what is the future going to hold for Asclepius Snakebite Foundation, and kind of where's your next kind of set of work going to go, and kind of from here, really?
Well,
Nick,
I think our goals for now, one is we're working on procuring sort of stable funding at the moment, and so working on some grants and trying to get some things off the ground. But as far as location goes, Guinea is going to be our crown jewel. We've sort of set up a formal partnership with them. The government has been very involved in us being out there, and then having Salou and the snakebite clinic as a jump off point is just a wealth of research knowledge for us, but also more importantly, some really good clinical stuff where we can make a big impact. But we also, once we develop a good model there, we're comfortable with the idea is to start to spread that model to other countries that invite us. We've been in contact with a few other West African countries, some Central African countries, and then potentially, applying those models to areas in Latin America and Southeast Asia over the long haul. But really for us, it's improving clinical medicine at that snakebite area in Guinea, and then starting to really do a lot of good publications on the effectiveness of our treatments and some of the sort of more nerdy herpetology things, if you will. So like I get really nerdy into like the venomics and stuff like that, and working in the lab on that stuff, and seeing if we can start to apply some sort of novel treatments to some of these venoms.
Yeah, I would add on to that too, if I can. So there's some of the stuff that we want to do too is look beyond just the snakebite treatment, and what are other ways that we can improve this? One of the projects I'm really excited about right now that we're doing is a project that Nick is spearheading to look at ketamine for pain management for snake bites. Ketamine is a drug that has a very long history of very safe use in austere settings and emergency medicine and wilderness medicine and special operations. And it's cheap and it's widely available in Africa, but it's not used as an analgesic, it's used as an anesthetic. But if you give it at a very, very low dose, you can get pain management that's equivalent to morphine, but without the risk of respiratory depression or hypotension, and these other sort of dangerous side effects. So Nick is spearheading a project with that, which, we want to look at sort of cross-disciplinary things too. I think, take that, for example, and look at PTSD. PTSD is a new thing that's been associated with snakebite. It was only until a few years ago that people started to look at the psychological effects, and we know that there's good evidence around the association between untreated acute pain and trauma and traumatic injuries and development of chronic pain and chronic PTSD. And in Africa, using ketamine, this is the first time in 10 years that I've been able to actually give adequate analgesia to my patients, which is a pretty amazing thing to be able to do. And I think ketamine offers potentially a safe, effective, accessible, and affordable way to bring pain management to snakebite patients in Africa. And given that a lot of these patients are viper bites, that could have a huge impact, and maybe we'll even reduce the PTSD with that. So I think that's like one example of the sort of cross-disciplinary stuff we're interested in. And then we're focusing on the centers because essentially what we found is if you just go somewhere and throw a bunch of money at a problem, throw a bunch of antivenom at it, sort of a scattershot approach, eventually those clinics run out of getting antivenom, and then the doctor who was trained in snakebite moves on, and usually they run out of antivenom first, and then all the good work that you did sort of evaporates because they get a bad antivenom and someone goes to that hospital and is treated and pays a bunch of money and has a bad outcome, and then the community doesn't trust antivenom again. So we found that our model is sort of to develop these snakebite centers of excellence and really get a foothold in an area where there's a huge problem, a lot of death, a lot of disability, a lot of bites, and very few resources. Sort of develop a center of real specialty care where we can ensure that patients will always get good treatment. And then we can sort of take the lessons learned there, as Nick is saying, and use that as a ripple effect to spread outward and influence positively in more places.
Yeah, I think that model sounds like it's definitely got potential to work, and it's quite interesting that you just spoke about PTSD, because I think as a whole that's kind of forgotten by a lot of people in snakebite, and it's something that we've talked about before on the podcast, and not in masses of detail, but it seems to definitely be one of the forgotten aspects. And for you to talk about, actually, is there a way that we can treat acute pain management that can help effectively cut down on PTSD cases after snakebite? That's actually quite interesting, especially using something as readily available and in a lot of cases, especially I know in the UK, is frowned upon from a drug use perspective. That actually it's quite interesting that there's other uses that people just don't realise that could be there. So that sounds really interesting.
You were saying about using ketamine to help with the PTSD. It's also being used for depression, which is another side effect. Do you think that would have a benefit using it during the treatment?
Well, yeah. So ketamine's sort of an old drug with a lot of new hot topics going on right now. It may have some effect. I think the bigger magnifier is, at lower doses at 0.1 milligrams per kilogram, it actually has pretty good analgesic effect. So I think the main function of it is not going to be so much the depressive side, but really just managing that pain and keeping the patient more comfortable. It was interesting in Guinea because I had to lower what our treatment protocol was as far as dosing goes, because I think patients were so just drug naive there. They're just not used to having medications. That they even at our lowest dose that we use in America for pain control, I had to half it because patients were just going too deep into sleep, which was sort of an interesting finding that me and Jordan are writing a manuscript on right now.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, actually. Again, I think that's probably something else we can talk about, that could be talked about again in great detail. And I have got an eye on the time, and we have been recording for 59 minutes now. So
we're good for a couple more. Yeah, we the interesting part is, ketamine out there is widely available, as Jordan said. I mean, we were using doses of 5 milligrams for pain control, which at least in my practice in the U.S. people would just laugh at you. But you're talking about, you buy a 500 milligram bottle for $3 US. And that bottle can go quite a long ways as long as it's appropriately sort of used.
Yeah, and just to clarify one thing, based off one of the questions you guys were asking a second ago. So there's two, ketamine is being used separately for depression in different trials, and for PTSD actually in some trials as well. And that's definitely very promising and an interesting area. What we're talking about doing is using it for pain management exclusively right now, but with the hope that, through managing pain in that acute phase, that may ultimately be tied to lower incidence of PTSD later on, because there's good evidence that shows that people who have untreated pain seem to develop PTSD at higher rates, as well as chronic regional pain and things like that. So we think maybe by providing a better pain management, we could also reduce the risk of developing PTSD in these patients.
Yeah, well said, Jordan.
And I think that's really quite interesting as well. So. As I say, we've been recording for an hour. I do have a conscious on time. Are you guys okay to go for a little bit longer, or?
Yeah, another 20 minutes. I'm good.
Another 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm good for that as well.
Okay, so we'll carry on because I think we've probably got more things to talk about. So as you say, I've lost my words again. This always happens when I do segues about time, incidentally. But just let me get that back up. So, with you being heavily involved in Guinea, you were saying that you see a higher percentage of elapid bites there. Compared to other countries that you've worked in, I'm going to apologise because I've completely lost train of thought what I was going to ask midway through.
No, you're good. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I can throw something out to fill in for a second, because
please do.
I meant to comment on this earlier. So it's interesting. You were asking sort of what's the profile of cases that we see, and I think it's very different in a lot of in different places, and that's one of the challenges of snakebite is I don't think there's a one size fits all solution. In Benin, I would say 90%, probably 80 or 85% of my patients were carpet viper bites, and very, very severe ones. People coming in with critical anemia, hemorrhagic shock, bleeding from various orifices and just requiring massive blood transfusion, and just, very, very sick patients. But virtually no elapid bites. I think I had one dry bite from an elapid while I was there. A couple spitting cobra bites, but interestingly, again, their spitting cobras don't cause as much neurotoxicity as in Guinea, although there was a little bit, which is also not reported elsewhere. So, you go to a place like Benin and it's mostly carpet vipers. You go somewhere like Guinea, it's mostly, Bitis and Causis and Atract aspis and then a lot of elapids. You go to somewhere like this clinic in Kenya that's getting, 500 bites a month. And, interestingly, I was talking to the clinician out there, because it's run by a clinical officer, sort of like a PA. And, he was making it sound like there were a lot of patients who came very early, and most of the bites were not terribly severe there. And, that goes very contrary to our experience in a lot of other places where, oftentimes patients don't show up until very late. And then when they do show up, they're very sick. So, there's a lot that needs to be sorted out still. I think, one of them, another project we're looking at doing is just defining what a severe bite is, because as of right now, there's no standard definition for severity in snakebite. So, in Africa or worldwide, really, I think only in the US. So, a severe bite to Nickeri might be a totally different definition than a severe bite, to this guy in Kenya. And we really do need to standardize a lot of things like that moving forward, in order to have some validity when we start to analyze antivenoms, as the WHO moves forward with their push to bring new antivenoms out.
One of the things that is we're looking into at LSTM is using a model to start effectively rating necrosis, which will help massively, as you say, with the efficacy testing of antivenoms, or even just the development and seeing if they're working. As you said there, you can't measure severity. We can't really measure necrosis in a standardized model. So one person's severe necrosis is maybe not another person's. So putting in these standards is a big part of pushing forward in even down to the manufacturing guidelines of antivenom, which the WHO wants to push. It's allowing the companies to see how it works, how far they can actually treat, say, a necrotic bite, which they can say it might work, but if the bite wasn't a severe one, it's then not kind of a valid research, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah. I think it's important to, something like, just to highlight something like developing these potential snakebite severity scores and sort of discussing all these different types of bites throughout Africa and how they vary. It's just sort of one way we can do things is improving communication among all these different snakebite groups, and so sort of having not so maybe not open access, but having a good working relationship with multiple groups and sort of almost moving as one giant amoeba would help to sort of improve our data, to improving potential treatments and sort of figuring out exactly where we need to focus our efforts, rather than sort of being these siloed groups that are sort of doing their own thing.
It's definitely something that every time that kind of Ross discusses snakebite initiatives or something like that with us in our kind of group chat, one of the things that always keeps coming up is cooperation would be the biggest key to helping the snakebite initiatives combat the problem. If you've got 4 snakebite initiatives working in one country, are they all working on the same goal, or are they working on different goals? If they combined all their resources, they could achieve it. And knowledge share.
Yeah, certainly. Are they working on the same goal, and are they moving in the same direction? And sad to say, as we all know, in sort of the scientific realm, are they sometimes contradicting each other and sort of halting progression? Because it's just some people can be semi-territorial, and so we at ASF we'd like to sort of welcome working with anybody who wants to work together, so we can all sort of focus our energy together to sort of get better patient outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great talk, Ed, I had the pleasure of meeting Nick Casewell at IST, and we were talking about this, and I actually have a draft of an email to your team to invite you guys to join with us on this project for looking at severity. So hopefully we can work together on that.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to go ahead. Nick is very keen at pushing that kind of cooperation. We all are, because we know the benefit of what cooperation does.
Definitely.
When we cooperate worldwide with other venom research units, we can get such a deeper knowledge kind of pool to share and take from.
And I think some of the work that Health Action International has done with some of the cooperations they've done with varied snakebite institutions and foundations in the countries they're working in, it goes to show that the work and the data collection they've been able to get is just absolutely incredible. And I think that, as I say, they are again, they were the first people to stress that actually the cooperation between all of you is what's going to solve it, more than one individual institution trying to fight to do it by themselves. It's actually going to be when everybody starts to cooperate better and share the data and their experiences, that actually a solution is going to come quicker than people realise. And that's one thing.
Absolutely.
I think that's one thing. If you look at the Indian Snakebite Initiative, ISI, they've done very, very well, is they've taken some work that they have seen from 2 or 3 different institutions and different areas within India, the different institutions within India, and they've cooperated all together, and they've just recently released a snakebite app for your mobile phone, which we've been lucky to able to get a username for the podcast, and actually the work that they're doing there is going to help advance they do have a better infrastructure than Africa and in India, but they're them coming together, and those different regions coming together has been able to help them produce something that is genuinely going to help towards solving their issue, and then that can be used as a model for other countries that have have a similar infrastructure, such as some of the Southeast Asian countries that have got that mobile phone kind of smartphone infrastructure already in place, that they can take that and use that to help them. And I think that'll be the same with what happens eventually in Africa. It's just
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I always think of this like, the thing about the blind men and the elephant. One guy touches his tail and says it's a rope, and one guy touches his trunk and says it's a tree. That's sort of how I think about snakebite, and that also is sort of like how I envision not just our group but all of the groups. I think within our group we've tried to pull in a lot of interdisciplinary people, or multidisciplinary people, I should say, so that because the way that I look at it, and the way that Nick looks at it, and the way that Kate Jackson looks at it as a herpetologist, or Eric Wren as a biochemist, or Steve Mackesy as a genomics guy, like everyone's looking at it with their own sort of bias, but also their own experience and their own unique perspective. And so, actually, I went and talked to Nick at IST because I think they're probably, the LSTM group probably knows more about spitting cobras venoms than just about anyone right now. And so, we're seeing these bizarre neurotoxic bites from spitting cobras. So who better to, speak to than the best in the business on it. So I think that's really, the way that we should all be looking at this, and the best approach moving forward is just coming together and saying, hey, this is an interesting problem. We'd love to get your insight. Would you guys be interested in working on this?
Yeah, I agree, and I think if and I think stuff like obviously the Snakebite Awareness Day and getting that more information out there about and about snakebite as well is going to make a big difference to obviously help you guys get the funding to do this work, and also for other initiatives to realise that there is other people out there working on similar things that they can get the help from. Because I think that's one of the things, is that there is so many initiatives in every country has their own, in general seems to have their own snakebite initiative if they have a snakebite problem, that actually the problems are all very similar in dependent on region. So what they're trying to fix, they can help each other with, and they're just not realizing that's the case. So it's definitely interesting to hear another voice, and it's nice that you've kind of said that actually talking to people like LSTM makes a big difference, where you can talk to them about these different things that you're seeing from spitting cobra venoms and from spitting cobra envenomations, and get that information that will help you guys create a treatment plan to help the people who are bitten by, who show those effects, those clinical effects.
Yeah.
So it's great to hear that these cooperations are starting to appear and they're starting to work. So
Definitely, I think it's nice. We're all giant nerds for snakes and venoms and things at the end of the day. So
exactly.
that's the fun thing about talking to you guys or going to conferences and things is I think we all have a lot more in common, and than on these issues. And it's just really the best thing is that we all just see it slightly differently. So we should harness that as a strength.
No, I fully agree. I fully agree. And that's one of the things about this podcast, is that we wanted to do it because it gives all these different opinions are now allowing people with all these different opinions to voice them in a public realm. And then there may be a chance that one day you guys are listening to it and you go, hang on a minute, that could be useful for us. So it opens a dialogue, a conversation between fields that you wouldn't have normally open that dialogue between, which is great. I am very conscious on time, so I would like to thank you guys for joining us today. It's been absolutely fantastic. We genuinely thank you so much for coming on. It's been great, and actually hearing some more more about the clinical side of snakebite has been really interesting, especially for me. It's actually made my mind go a go a bit into overdrive, which is why I've been stumbling around on words a little bit. Some of the stories that you guys have told us and that you've seen, and the work that you're doing is genuinely great, and it's going to help save so many people's lives. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no
Thank
problem.
you.
We appreciate you guys having us, and if anybody's listening and they want more information about ASF, they can go to snakebitefoundation.org. We have a whole host of different projects that we're doing, and the people that are affiliated with our group. And if they're so inclined, there's a donate button at the top right corner. But and if anybody wants to work with us, please contact us. We're always open to ideas, suggestions, and sort of getting more and more involved around the different areas.
Yeah, definitely. And a huge thanks to you guys for bringing us on. I think, again, one of the big issues is there's just not a lot of attention paid to snakebite. And so this is a great way of helping to raise awareness and hopefully support. So thank you.
And it's genuinely an absolute pleasure. And you actually just did a lot of my job for me, because I was about to ask how would people get involved and find out more information about the snakebite group. So you've actually done my job for me, which made it easier. So I'd just like to thank our listeners again once more for listening, and please do get involved and like and share the Facebook page. Please do share this episode around, because there's lots of information in this episode that could really help people with the work that they're doing. And also, please do look to get involved in snakebite initiatives around either where you are, where you're positioned, because we do have a lot of global listeners. Or get involved if you can, in things going on just generally around the world, because every little bit does help in this situation. So thank you all very much for listening, and we'll speak to you all again soon.